Hello and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. I am Daryl Grove. I am not joined by Taylor Rockwell today. And I want to give you a warning. Today's episode is for serious soccer nerds only. On today's show, I talk in detail about the US Under-20 national team with Will Parchman of Top Draw Soccer. Here's why. The US Under-20 team, coached by Tab Ramos, are in Costa Rica right now for the Under-20 World Cup qualifying tournament. It's a CONCACAF tournament. The first game is this Saturday, 3:30 p.m. Eastern on Univision Deportes against Panama. The roster is made up of guys you will recognise from the TSS Scouting Network, names like Jonathan Klinsmann, Jeremy Ebobis, Emmanuel Sabi, Brooks Lennon, Tyler Adams from the New York Red Bulls, and Luca Della Torre of Fulham. If you want to get to know this team before that tournament, and if you're invested in the future of the US men's national team, which is what these guys are, then this is the episode for you. And fittingly, this episode is sponsored by Roughneck Scarves. Roughneck Scarves are the official providers of scarves for US soccer, Major League Soccer, the NCAA, and the USL. These are serious scarves for serious soccer fans. Not only do Roughneck provide quality soccer scarves, I mean this very sincerely, they are great people. We have enjoyed working with Roughneck so much these last few months. They're big supporters of the show and big supporters of soccer in America. So if you want to show your support for the US national team or for your MLS team or your college team or your USL team, you want to wear it around your neck or wave it in the air, we recommend going to roughneckscarves.com, RUFFNECK scarves.com. While you're there, check out the Total Soccer Show scarf. Roughneck have made an official Total Soccer Show scarf, which has the hello and welcome on one side and the Total Soccer Show on the other side. It's blue and black and it is beautiful. We love it and we're not ashamed to say so. And if you want to get 20% off any scarf you find at roughneckscarves.com, all you got to do is use the discount code Total Soccer Show, all one word, Total Soccer Show, for 20% off. The link is in the show notes and I encourage you to click it. All right, let's play that intro music and then we'll talk to Will Parchman about the US Under-20s. So I am joined on the phone by Mr. Will Parchman. Mr. Will Parchman, hello.
It's an honor. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you. That's high praise. High praise. I want to first of all say thank you for taking the time to come on and talk to us about the US Under-20s. I also thought, since I want to call you a semi-regular on the show, right? I want to sort of, and we pick up new listeners now and again who then may not be familiar. So I want to sort of get them the background on Will Parchman and Top Draw Soccer, because you guys occupy a very sort of a very specific niche in the US soccer media landscape, as I understand it. So would you mind explaining to our listeners?
Yeah, we're definitely soccer nerds. You gotta really like soccer to find your way to us. No, we're basically the rivals of soccer in America. So American football fans will know, a lot of rankings, a lot of up and coming players, do a lot of pro prospects, Americans abroad, the young kids and that kind of thing. So a lot of basically our wheelhouse is U14 to up through the college age.
So it's fair to say that you are the sort of like yourself and the website topdrawsoccer.com are the authority, at least in terms of the amount of knowledge on those age groups.
I'm willing to paint us as an authority, sure. Myself, Travis Clark, and J.R. Eskelson are kind of the three, sort of the three main wings of the content side of things on Top Drawer. And between us, we've spent I don't know if it's an unhealthy amount of time, but certainly a lot of time looking into kind of who's next.
So that makes you the perfect person to talk to me about the U20 roster and the upcoming U20 World Cup qualifying tournament that's kicking off on Saturday down in Costa Rica. We were both on the teleconference with head coach Tab Ramos yesterday. You got a question in. I wasn't brave enough to ask a question because all the things I wanted to ask about were already taken. But I wanted to sort of address a couple of things that Coach Ramos said and get your take on them. Is that okay with you?
Absolutely.
All right. So the first thing that I think one of the first questions was about the starting goalkeeper, and we got the distinct impression the starting goalkeeper is going to be Jonathan Klinsmann, son of Jurgen, obviously. And this is a thing that, because I don't necessarily have the deep knowledge that you have, I honestly thought that the Jonathan Klinsmann inclusion on US youth teams was at least a little bit nepotism-y while Jurgen was the boss. But does this mean that Jonathan Klinsmann is for real?
Whether he's for real or not, I don't know. We might have to wait to see, how he does on a big international stage like this. But it's not a. It wasn't. I don't think it was a clear-cut choice. It wasn't like 2015 where Zach Steffen was the guy and there was no real, competition just because he was so unquestionably good. I think this was a lot closer.
Yeah.
Klinsmann, JT Marcinkowski, who's he's at Georgetown. He's a San Jose Earthquakes guy. Was sort of the number two in this equation, and I think in my estimation, and certainly of our staff, but in the estimation of a lot of people, I think kind of viewed Marcinkowski as the better player of the two, but he doesn't have Klinsmann's size, which I think was kind of a tiebreaker maybe, because Klinsmann's, if you look at him, he looks like an international keeper. I mean, he's 6'4", he's got a huge wingspan. He's got a good frame that'll continue to grow into. And so he's kind of physically, he's everything you want from a keeper. My hesitation, because we obviously watch probably more college soccer than anybody, is that he had some major question marks at Cal with his ability to get down on balls, to get to, side to side. His agility is lacking, and his instincts. I mean, he let in some balls, this year. You can go back and watch a 4-3 game they played against UCLA, where he just wasn't reacting quickly to shots. I mean, he let in some ones that literally rolled right past his legs. And so, is that a marker that he's not ready? Not necessarily. Obviously Ramos sees things that we don't.
Yeah.
So Klinsmann could be, a lot better than some of us are giving credit for. I don't think it was ever necessarily nepotism per se. I think it certainly helped him get on the radar. There's no question about that.
Right.
But I think in this pool, there are better keepers than Klinsmann, but I've been surprised before, so we'll see.
So if Jonathan Klinsmann gets beat low in the first game against Panama, we should start worrying.
Yeah. I think that's his Achilles heel, certainly.
Also, one of the most striking things to me in the press conference is somebody, I can't remember who it was, asked specifically about left backs, because there's no obvious left back on this roster. Was it you or was it someone else asked that question? I'm sorry, I can't remember.
I think Brian Sciaretta got that one.
Okay. Oh, I knew it was someone that I liked. I like Brian Sciaretta, he's a good guy. And Tab Ramsey's answer about left back was, essentially he said, we know who the player is, he's been training there with his club, and he gave this kind of like long sort of explanation of who the left back would be and why that's a good idea, but very conspicuously did not name the left back, which I thought was a really odd move. So who do you think it is, based on the sort of clues that he gave, and why would he not just say the name?
Well, he named, it's funny, he named the left back without naming the left back. I mean, he said, he gave some context clues. He said he's been training there with his pro team, and that is without question, in my mind, Danny Acosta, who is obviously at RSL. He's one of the most promising, RSL young kids. Has been a number 6 the entire cycle, and is basically going to be thrust into this left back role, which I was picking through some archives this morning, and I don't believe he's ever played there for the U20s. He has been playing there for his club team. He's obviously gotten some runouts in practice the last couple of weeks, I'm sure. But he's not. It's not a comfortable position. I can't speak to why Tab, wouldn't sort of name him outright. But I think it was a big blow. Marcelo Borges, who's been the left back for most of this cycle, is injured apparently right now, so that he was obviously not on the roster.
Right.
And then one of the more puzzling omissions to me was a kid named Nelson, who has been in this roster for the entire cycle, and was left off. So that to me, he's a pure left back. He's going to North Carolina next season. So that to me was a surprise. But yeah, Danny Acosta will be the left back. John Nelson, I was forgetting his first name, but John Nelson. But yeah, the left back position as usual is a problem.
Is this about there's a weird thing with like U20 soccer. This is just in my head. I don't know how true this is, so correct me if I'm wrong. Where you sort of only get more or less one shot at going to the U20 World Cup, right? Unless you're sort of a phenom. And so maybe there's a thing of like Danny Acosta. Ramos just thinks this is a kid who deserves to go, needs to go, so I'm going to take him and play him in this position, even if he's not necessarily the best left back in terms of experience. Is there an element of that, of just making sure that certain guys get to go to tournaments because it's also about development? Or am I thinking of this the wrong way?
No, I think it's more that each coach has his guys that he trusts.
Right.
Guys that, you've got a 2-year cycle with these kids, and you're bringing them along with this U20 World Cup, and obviously as an extension CONCACAF qualifying sort of always in the back of your mind. So you're basically sort of grooming these guys from the jump. And I think, if you look at Danny Acosta, he's been in, if not every camp, then close to every camp that he's been able to go to. And, he's worn the captain's armband before for this team. He's been, he's a quality holding midfielder. And I think, Tab wanted to reward that in a sense. But also I think he couldn't avoid the fact that Acosta's been training at left back, right, with RSL, and RSL might be looking to move him there full time. It's just the fact that he hasn't played there on the eve of, the biggest tournament of the cycle so far. I think that's sort of the question mark, and you wonder, is he ready? Does he sort of have that skill set? And I think it's just sort of feeds into this narrative that the U.S. can't develop and can't find left backs, which is maybe a little bit overblown, but we'll see how he does, but just keeping in mind that it's not a position that's overly natural to him historically.
Yeah, I had a conversation with Matt Doyle maybe 3 or 4 months ago, and he was talking about how one of the problems he sees is a lot of US fullbacks are converted midfielders. They're guys who play midfield until they're 19, and then suddenly someone says to them, "Oh, midfield's full, but we need a fullback, so you go play there," instead of having someone who just plays left back from a young age and learns it all the way through.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's a tough position to teach in the modern game, especially. A fullback in certain systems is the most important player on the field. And if you look at certain pro teams, even in MLS, and I'm thinking of the Sounders especially. But look at Toronto FC. That whole MLS Cup final in 2016 was fullback heavy. Both teams were sprinting fullbacks up the touchline to provide the majority of the width. So it's tough to develop that position. And I think U.S. coaches see a little bit more mobility in midfielders, whereas, if you look at a lot of our natural fullbacks, they're kind of center backy, if that makes sense. In the U.S., we don't produce a ton of overlapping fullbacks. We have a lot of really defensive minded guys who don't particularly like to get forward. And in the modern game, you really need fullbacks to push width at least a little bit. And I think that might be part of the reason why John Nelson was left home. He's very defensive left back. But more than anything, I think coaches really value fullbacks who can really create width and interchange. And I think that's why you see Marlon Fosse.
Yeah,
he's a guy not many people know of. He's out of Fulham, just incorporated in the national team scene in the past year, and he is a overlapping fullback to a T. And I don't even know that he's that great defensively, but I think he's in this team because he can really, he's fast and he can push width. And so I think that's a huge point of value for coaches these days.
I'm picturing Fosse in my head. He has kind of David Luiz-ish hair. Am I thinking of the right guy?
Yes.
All right. So That'll be someone for, I'm thinking of like listeners who were maybe on the fence about watching this U20 game, and I'm hoping they might now tune in and watch it, right? 3:30 on Saturday on Univision. So now you know to look for Marlon Fosse bombing down the right and maybe Danny Acosta staying home and Jonathan Klinsmann hopefully getting down low and making saves.
You get it, yeah.
In between those two guys, in between the fullbacks, I'm confused about the centre-backs because I keep hearing that it's going to be Justin Glad and Tommy Redding starting, but also Eric Palmer-Brown is captain. And then I think it was a Brian Schroeter interview with Tyler Adams, suggesting that Eric Palmer-Brown, the Sporting KC centre-back, just came back from Porto, right, might end up playing in midfield. And I also saw a tweet from you saying that would be, I think, to quote you, a bad if Eric Palmer-Brown stepped into midfield. So how do you see that sort of centre-back situation and Eric Palmer-Brown's role?
Yeah, I think Eric Palmer-Brown's probably the most interesting player to watch in this entire roster. Obviously, as you mentioned, he's the captain. He will play. I mean, captain, you don't crown a captain a week before the tournament and then sit him on the bench. So he's going to play somewhere. I think I would be surprised if he's in the defensive midfield. And the reason is because, again, I just went back through this entire cycle and all of the lineups, and he did not play in the defensive midfield once in a competitive match that I could find anyway. Obviously, we've gotten reports that he's been training there the last couple of weeks, so it's not like he's never played there, period. But I would be really, really reticent to put your best center back into the defensive midfield in the most important tournament of the cycle so far, where in a place where he's never played before. And I think go back to the 2015 U20 World Cup, which obviously Palmer-Brown is the only player on this roster that played in, and watch him against Ukraine. He got the start in that game. It was the last group game, and Ukraine absolutely shredded the U.S. And Palmer-Brown's worst attributes in that game, nobody had a great game. So I'm not trying to single out Palmer-Brown. He wasn't awful. But his worst attributes were and are when he gets stuck in space. He can kind of float a little bit. And I think that's the one thing that you can't have from number 6 is to not be comfortable spatially and sort of lose your positioning. And especially on Ukraine's second goal, he got completely turned around. And yes, it's one goal, given it was 2 years ago. He's improved since then. He's been on loan in Portugal. No question there. But it's still a part of his game to where, you want him in the central defensive on the defensive line and at center back, primarily because he's such a good man marker. You get him in the box, he is a fantastic cerebral center back who knows he can follow pretty much anybody, and he's great in the air. The problem is when he gets too high. This was the same thing with Matt Miazga at the beginning of his career. He would follow guys out into the midfield and get completely lost and open up space. So my hope is that he'll play at center back where he's played his entire career, where he's comfortable. Maybe center defensive mid is something for the future, but it's too late now, in my opinion. I mean, you should have started that a year or two ago if you wanted that to be the case. So that said, my ideal center back pairing is Tommy Redding and Eric Palmer-Brown. I think those two guys. Redding's also had the captain's armband. I believe he's, if not the oldest player on this roster, then maybe a couple days from that. And so I think having Palmer-Brown, who's played in the U20 World Cup, having Redding, who's one of the oldest possible players to be able to play in this tournament, having those two guys together, I think would be huge. And then put Adams, in front of him. I think that would be my ideal.
Yeah, I want to ask you about Tyler Adams because I've seen him play a couple of times. I saw him in the USL for New York Red Bulls 2. And he just turned 18. So when I saw him, he was 17, playing against grown men and really sort of running a midfield against grown men with it looked to me like he was very just smooth and clever and moved the ball very intelligently. But I've only seen those two games. So is that the type of player we can expect to see? Like what does Tyler Adams bring to the table?
Yeah, he's very much a possession-oriented defensive midfielder. I mean, if you watched him in the USL Championship game late last year, I mean, he bossed the midfield against Swope Park Rangers. I mean, he was the man, sort of the hub going forward, and he's very much an Ozzy Alonso type,
okay,
where he's he's probably not as much of a Badger as Alonso. He doesn't sort of have the edge.
Who is though? Who is?
Yeah, right. But he's willing to get stuck in. But if you watch Ozzy, I think the most distinct part of his game is that he just piles pass on pass on pass.
Yeah.
And most of them are horizontal, but they're basically intended to sort of prod the rest of the midfield into life. And I think that's why the Sounders have been so good on the ground the last couple of years. And I think, you look at Adams, and he's the same way. I mean, he's actively looking to get people involved. He's looking to restart attacks, sort of be the base of it. And so he's not sort of a hatchet man where he's not a destroyer where he's just kind of looking to break things up and then boot it down the field. I mean, he's really kind of, picking his eyes up and trying to restart the attack. So I think the only worry is that he's young. I mean, he's obviously playing up a cycle. So
yeah, it's
the question to me of whether Ramos feels comfortable putting Adams in over Palmer Brown, who'd be playing a new position. In my opinion, I would definitely go with Adams and keep players where they're most comfortable.
And then I'm sort of hesitant to ask about the rest of the team because it sounded like Tab Ramos wasn't settled on a formation. I'm sort of guessing it's going to be some sort of like 4-2-3-1 or 4-3-3. But do you have a take on sort of what the makeup of the rest of the team looks like? Like how many forwards, for example?
Yeah, he's played a 4-3-3 fairly routinely in this cycle. I mean, it's what he started with. It's what he started with last CONCACAF championship before the U.S. kind of got sidetracked and then sort of went to a 4-4-2. So I think it'll be one of those two formations. I think, in my opinion, the 4-3-3 just fits better with the attacking players they have. They don't really have a ton of like two-way wide midfielders, which makes me think the 4-2-3-1 is probably a little bit beyond this team because, I mean, you look at guys like Jonathan Lewis and Brooks Lennon, Coy Kraft, even the Jeremy Ebobisse who could potentially play out wide. I think there's just not enough defensive work in there, and so you need to kind of cover that with the midfield, which is basically what a 4-3-3 is for, to sort of rope in the attacking options that maybe you don't necessarily need to drop back as much. So,
right.
I think for me, a front line of Ebobisse, Lennon, and then Emmanuel Sabi, who's at Las Palmas in Spain, would be really interesting and really dangerous. It's just a question of who's opening up the space from the midfield, which it just seems like an American problem in every tournament at every age group.
Yeah, I noticed Ramos was sort of unwilling to name who his playmaker was. Instead, he kind of listed a lot of midfielders. So if we do have, say, a three-man central midfield and the deepest guy is Tyler Adams or maybe Eric Palmer-Brown, but based on what you're saying, we're hoping Tyler Adams. Who are the other two midfielders in that three?
So I think the number 8 is without question Luca De La Torre, who is a Fulham guy, developed with Emerson Hyndman at Fulham in the academy for the last couple of years. A lot of people at Fulham were higher on De La Torre than they were on Hyndman. I'm not sure if I agree with that, but I don't think he's quite as well-rounded as Hyndman. He's not quite as much of an all-around player, but I think he might even be better in possession than Hyndman is. I mean, he's fantastic stampeding runner from deep, but he's not sort of that guy who will march up underneath the strikers and kind of stay there. So I think he's probably the sort of the connector between whoever plays in defensive midfield. And the number 10, I mean, it's always a question. It seems unresolved with this team, which is why I think the formation will hinge on how Ramos sees the 10. And I think Sebastian Saucedo out of RSL is probably the closest thing they have. But it's just puzzling to me they didn't bring in Jackson Ewell to this camp, who's obviously the San Jose Earthquakes attacking midfielder, drafted out of UCLA this offseason. Just a really, really good player and comfortable in that number 10 role, and he's not even on the roster. So we'll see, where that hinges, but I think De La Torre and Saucedo in some combination in the middle. It's imperfect, but I think at this point you just kind of have to sort of throw a number 10 at the wall and see if it sticks.
But at least that's three sort of very technically good players, right? If it's Adams, De La Torre, and Saucedo, that has me excited to watch that midfield, I think. Yeah,
I mean, they'll at the very least they'll actively try to play through the middle, was a problem for this team in 2015. I think they kind of spread everything out wide, especially in the World Cup, where the midfield was Gideon Zalalem and Emerson Hyndman, who were both number 8s. I mean, neither of those guys really felt comfortable getting up underneath the striker, and so saw a lot of sort of those like 20 to 30 yard diagonal passes to the wings, which is okay. It's just not very reliable, and so the attack kind of blinked on and off. And so my hope is that with players who are technical in the middle, they can kind of find some balance and maybe push some numbers up the middle instead of out wide all the time.
On the absence of Jackson Ewell, is there a chance that's because his team wouldn't release him, San Jose? Were they sort of, we're going to start him at the start of the MLS season, so we want him with us? Or is it just like he's not selected for this roster?
Yeah, I mean, there's always a chance. That question wasn't posed to Tab specifically, so I'm not sure what his status was. But I will say this: in 2015, Tab took Tommy Thompson from the same team. Tommy was in the exact same situation. He was just signed. He was a rookie. He was, or if not a rookie, I think maybe entering his second year in 2015. But either way, he was a young guy looking for minutes. And same coach, Dom Kinnear, had no problem releasing him then. So I mean, I can't say definitively that was the case again. But I can't see why, he would keep him back for a couple preseason games. That said, there were a couple guys who were not released, and specifically mentioned Josh Perez at Fiorentina, who was not given clearance to go, and I think he was probably a wide starter on this team. So that was at least one guy who wasn't given clearance to hop across the pond.
On guys like that, say Josh Perez, maybe Cameron Carter-Vickers, obviously the reason they're not with this team is because this is like during European season, right? And Fiorentina might need Perez. He's made the matchday squad several times, right? And CCV the same.
Yeah, he's actually played,
Yeah. Is there a chance that then those guys will be assuming we make the tournament, assuming we make the World Cup, right, which is in May, I believe, in South Korea? Could a lot of these U20 guys on the roster now lose their spot to some European-based guys who become available for the actual tournament?
Yeah, it's entirely possible. I mean, that's exactly what happened to Gideon Zalalem in 2015. I mean, he didn't play in the qualifying team. There were a lot of questions about what would happen with him and who's ultimately included in the World Cup team. So I'm sure Tab will have some changes between now and then. I mean, you look at Marcelo Borges, who's that left back that was injured. I mean, he could very well find his way back in if he's back in form. So there's always a few tweaks, especially when you get to the end of the European season. So I would assume Josh Perez would make the final roster, assuming all things equal. And
then you mentioned basically a front three. I'm imagining Lewis on the left, Jonathan Lewis from NYCFC. But then you mentioned Ebobisse and Sabi. Which way round do you see them lining up?
This is the big sort of question mark to me is how you get all these guys on the field, because Lewis and Coy Kraft in particular could very well be late speed injections. I mean, Ramos mentioned on the call that both guys obviously have a ton of speed, and those are the kinds of guys that he tends to like to pull off, in the 60th or 70th minute to sort of try to gas fullbacks. And so that could be the case. I think the three best guys are Sabi, Lennon, and Ebobisse. I think if he's starting on just talent alone, those three guys will probably start. In what order, I'm not sure. Maybe Sabi in the middle and Lennon on the left and Ebobisse on the right. I mean, that's pretty narrow. But it's sort of, if you commit to playing a 4-3-3, then I think you commit to playing narrow, up top anyway. I mean, you're not looking for those guys to get crosses in. So,
right.
I think it's you just have to try to get them all on the field at the same time, because they're too talented to sort of sit all three of them. Maybe Sabi isn't in form, and so he comes off the bench, but I would be interested in seeing all three of those guys on at the same time.
And do you know what the backstory is with Sabi? Because Ramos mentioned that essentially he wasn't looking like making the roster until maybe 2 weeks before it was named. And he mentioned that basically he didn't have international clearance to play for Las Palmas, I believe. And then he said that he saw something in the last couple of weeks, and now Sabi makes the roster. So I'm wondering if there's some sort of what's the story there? Like, how has that happened?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I've actually been in kind of intermittent contact with Sabi, so I'll have to check in and see what the story is there. But he obviously moved to Las Palmas late last year in lieu of going to Akron, which is where he was committed.
Right.
And apparently he just hasn't been cleared to play games. I mean, obviously he's been training with the team. So I mean, in those situations, you can be do normal practices. You can play in friendlies. You can go through preseason, but you can't play in sort of those competitive games. So I can't speak to the specifics of that, but as you mentioned, the tab clearly said he's been getting consistent call-ins to the U20. So obviously Ramos thinks highly of him. He's a huge talent.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of form, and he's obviously hit it at the right time.
So you think he just sort of banged some goals in practice in the last couple of weeks and just looked really sharp, and then they think, okay, let's take this guy?
Yeah, I mean, that's how it works. It doesn't really matter. Club form will help get you in the door a lot of the time because it's how you get noticed, and how you're playing and if you are playing on your club, I mean, that's sort of how you get noticed by national team coaches. But that all kind of falls away the second you step into camp. I mean, none of that. It doesn't matter how well you're playing for your club. If you don't perform in national team camp, you're not going to keep getting calls. And it seems like Sabi's something of a national team camp warrior, where he'll step into camp and he sort of eschews all of that sort of negative form and not playing for club when he's performing in national team camps and impressing those coaches. So maybe that'd be a lesson to future national teamers that as long as you get your foot in the door, it's all you from then on.
I want to ask about the sort of the style of play you expect from this U20 team. 'Cause obviously, we've seen Ramos's teams for a few years now. What can we expect to see them roll out in this qualifying tournament?
Yeah, so Ramos isn't the most aspirational coach in terms of his style. As we mentioned, he's not a formation guy where he feels like he has something that he's an expert in. He's sort of a jack of all trades guy, and he'll sort of mold what he feels the best formation is to his talent, which there's nothing particularly wrong about that. I mean, you can get some good performances out of that. It's just a sign that he's not an idealist; he's a pragmatist. And so what that means for formations and for how he sees games, I think it sort of translates into this counter press style where they press a lot through the midfield. They'll push a high line. They'll play it out to the wings and then funnel in. They try to get quick turnovers out of the midfield, quick 1-2s, and push it into the box. This is not a possession style team. It has never been under Ramos. I think if you see him coaching a national team in the future or a club, a pro team, this isn't going to be a team that looks to get 55 to 60% possession a game and rack up 600 passes. They're really trying to minimize their time on the ball to sort of maximize their chances. And so, whether you think that's good or not for a national team that's playing 19, 18, 20-year-olds, it's gotten results for them. They've qualified each of the 2 cycles that he's been there. They've obviously made a run to the quarterfinals of the U20 World Cup. I'm not sure that it's the best style for young kids holistically, but it's not. I don't think it's stunting them necessarily. It's just not. It's maybe not promoting the style that a lot of us would like to see.
So what are your expectations for specifically this CONCACAF tournament? Can I be expecting the US to kind of go down there, roll through the groups, and maybe lose to a Mexico or Costa Rica or Honduras in the final, but comfortably qualify? That's my uneducated guess at how this goes. But I also thought we would qualify for the Olympics. So
yeah, it's always a guessing game. This team tends to play down. They trailed to Myanmar 2 years ago in the U20 World Cup, a Myanmar team that had never been to a World Cup before. They had to struggle to beat Haiti in this tournament 4 years ago. So it's always kind of a guessing game on the youth level. But expectations should always be number one. This team has to qualify.
Yeah.
They didn't qualify in 2011. It was a disaster. Ramos came in and sort of righted the ship a little bit. Same with the U17s. They didn't qualify in 2013. It was the first time that ever happened, and that's unacceptable. This team has to qualify every single time. They're too professional, too good not to. And in my opinion, they have to look good doing it. I mean, in 2015, they almost did not qualify. They had to play Jamaica in a playoff. Jamaica is, they're a quality team, but the U.S. shouldn't be having as many problems with them as they did. Barely qualified, and then had a great run in the World Cup. So I think you have to, more than anything on the youth level, you really have to give it the eye test. I mean, how is this team playing? How do they look? How's the individual talent being folded in together? And I think that is really, really important on the CONCACAF level, especially because this team, on talent, they're better than every team, probably except Mexico. So they should be bossing these games. It should be, pinging the ball around. It should look good individually. And obviously qualifying is an obvious given.
And then mathematically, could you remind our listeners and maybe also me of exactly what we have to do to qualify? Because I know there's an initial group stage with we play Panama, St. Kitts. I forgot the third opponent in the group stage. And then we move on to, I believe, a second group stage?
Yeah, so it's Panama, St. Kitts, and Nevis, and Haiti are the three teams the U.S. will be playing in the group. St. Kitts and Nevis obviously is kind of cannon fodder, and then Haiti hasn't won a game in this tournament in 10 years. So those two teams should be fairly easy pickings. Panama will be difficult, but so basically it's a 14 group. The U.S. has to finish in the top two of that first 14 group, and then the groups are basically reshuffled based on the teams that made it through into 2 3-team groups. And all you have to do in that second group phase is finish in the top 2 of 3, and you qualify. So it's not exactly a rigorous process. So again, you finish in the top 2 and in the top 2 again, and you're in. And then the winners of those second 3-team group phases, those 2 teams are put into a final.
Okay, so there is a championship game then, yeah.
There is. It's completely ceremonial. The teams have already qualified, but they found in CONCACAF that it gives the teams more to play for, makes the competition a bit more meaty if there is a championship game, even if it doesn't really decide anything other than just, handing out a trophy to 2 teams that have already qualified.
Yeah, because we could end up with a US-Mexico championship game or Mexico-Costa Rica or US-Costa Rica. Any of those games would be sort of kind of great to watch.
And this is a development, right? I mean, it's less about, this isn't a senior team thing where they've got to go back to their clubs and these guys are playing, 11 months out of 12. I mean, these are all development games. So you add another game, it's all to the good because you're looking at another 90 minutes for some developing players.
So, Will, what sort of coverage can we expect at topdrawersoccer.com and on your Twitter feed throughout this the qualifying tournament?
Well, no promises of Twitter feed. I'll just be my normal snarky self if that's up your alley. But on Top Drawer, we'll obviously have match coverage from every game. You'll have match recaps and then analysis, obviously embedded in that. But yeah, I mean, we'll have feature stories, we'll have match coverage, we'll have after action reports, all that good stuff that the soccer nerds like. I'm not sure there's a whole lot of websites that love U20 CONCACAF time, but we certainly do.
I will. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me about the U20s today. I enjoyed our chat.
Yep. Cheers. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Will.